The Line We Crossed. This was a really good documentary feature film about, people protesting for the environment. And to me, it was really well laid out. We understood, in my opinion, the audience understands what's happening pretty much from the start. And there's a lot of great interviews and footage of these people getting, arrested, and all the different footage of what they're doing and different angles of how people perceive it. I just wonder, it starts to beg the question, is this a really efficient way to affect people into change? How, is this the best way to reach people who can stop this, the new oils and the new gases? I don't know. Are you putting yourselves in danger of being in jail for years, or, something happening where you end up dying for this cause? Is it a good enough return for what's happening? Is there other ways that can get it across better? And I think documentaries like this can really, really do that, because they can be viewed by so many different people. And I really like when I see documentaries about the environment. So I like it. It's well done. I think all the technical stuff is there for me. The sound, the editing, the different footage, all of it to me, the pace, the music, and everything was there. So I really hope this gets seen by a wide variety of people, and great job to you, and good luck.
Line We Crossed. I thought this was really, really interesting to watch. I do not live in England. However, I do think that there are fundamental things that are true across kind of most societies, I'll say. And there are just things that I think are just ultimately correct, like the ability to protest being a cornerstone of democracy, and how you protest and how that is policed obviously is, no matter what country you're in, going to be a very, very difficult, layered, not quite like technical situation, because there's obviously nonviolent protests, there's what ends up being violent or disruptive or damaging protests that can kind of get out of control quite quickly. There's, protests that put your own life kind of at risk. There's protests that don't. There's, obviously the impact on society. And unfortunately, there is a crossroads, or there's a pinnacle, a point where you have to be a certain level of disruptive to get the attention that you're seeking with staging a protest. And the less disruptive you are, the less attention it gets, the less your message gets spread, the less impact you have. So there's this very, very delicate line of, how do I effectively, safely, and within the very, very fluctuating bounds of the law, cause the most disruption to get the most attention, to get the most impact, the largest impact that I can. And I think that this film did a phenomenal job of really highlighting and showing just how often and easy those goalposts are moved. And things that were acceptable at one point, not even that long ago, how quickly that can change, and how, unfortunately, depending on who's in power at the time, depending on how votes go, depending on judges, depending on all of these things so far out of your control, how quickly the effectiveness of protesting can be put into a tiny, 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 tiny little box, to where it's not that it's pointless, but the amount of impact that you have, if you're obeying all of the laws that keep changing, can be completely void, essentially. And if you are obeying all of the laws, especially with what is going on in several countries right now under several different political, not landscapes, but political powers, that the ability to effectively protest is slowly being stripped away and stripped away and stripped away, and what that larger impact will have on the democracy of that country and as a society as a whole. Because I do think that the more it changes for one country, the more it will have, and that will have an effect and an impact in another country. Because we don't live in, we might live in separate countries, but as a society, especially with social media, especially in this day and age, what happens in one country, especially politically, does have an effect on other places. We do not exist in bubbles. We exist on one planet. And like I was saying, especially with the reach of social media, the reach of connectivity, the reach of the internet, of news, of everything, what happens in one place affects another. And I thought that this film did a great job of highlighting just exactly what was happening, especially over the course of months. Like this film took months to get through, and like I said, I found it really, really fascinating. I also, what their actual message was, the stop oil, all of that facts was great information to have as well. But I think the thing that was more jarring for me was the political ramifications of the laws and of protesting, and how truly restricted it is now, and how quickly that can change. So I thought it was really, really informative.
I really like the line we crossed. It is dark and sad and dystopian, like, which kind of is the point, reflects the reality. Um, the right to protest, as an American, the right to protest as a Black American, first of all, specifically, the right to protest is extremely important and not lost on me. So watching this really was palpable because it's like, as a Black American, we know the dangers of the right to of governments overreacting to protests. And I thought this film really showed a unique perspective on that. Um, Also, I really liked how this documentary was done as far as like following the whole story from like 2003, 2023, 2024, like with the like interviews like in real time and all of that stuff. Like it was really well put together, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So overall, great subject matter, really well explored, well executed, and free those activists.
I think this documentary raised some important questions when it comes to protesting. Like, what are acceptable forms of protesting? The protesters try to compare themselves to Gandhi. They're a little misguided on what Gandhi did, where he used hunger strikes to get his way instead of civil disobedience. But they're a little misguided in what they did. These protesters are passionate about their cause. I don't think anyone can disparage them on that. They're very passionate about their cause, to the point where they're angering people. They're very passionate about that. They were willing to break the law, which a lot of times throughout history, they say if you want to make a cause, you should be willing to die for that cause. And I think these people have shown that they're willing to put their lives on the line for their cause, for climate change. But as it is, this documentary in general is really asking, how far will it go, and what is peaceful protest? Because they keep bringing up that term throughout it, peaceful protest. We were peacefully protesting, and it is quite clear that they're clashing with the people of the United Kingdom and the judges and the law. They're really clashing about, is it civil disobedience? Is it what they're claiming that they're doing? Because to them, it's a peaceful protest. To the law, it is not. And so clearly they're getting prison time, so it's not a peaceful protest. But to them it was. At the end of the documentary, they acknowledge that it's civil disobedience and it was not peaceful protest, because they say as of March 2025 they'll no longer do this, which is great. They'll probably win more people over to their cause when they're not disrupting people's lives. And it'll bring more people over just because they're going to be willing to listen to their message when they're not having their lives disrupted and becoming angered because they're being blocked getting into work or wherever they're going. They're not having their lives disrupted. It's something where this documentary really does show these people's passion and how they will put their lives on the line. But the question is, did they go too far? And will they, or have they learned their lesson? And it quite clearly shows that perhaps, because they quite clearly want something to be done. But the question is, were they going the wrong way?
This documentary, The Lines We Cross, is very relevant to today's action. In today's political climate, it is necessary to stand up for what you believe in, now more so than ever before. Here we have this community in the UK, to stop oil and these damages from an act of climate resistance. And it really breaks down the rights that people have and the challenges that these protesters face despite doing this peaceful act and causing these subtle moments of disturbances. You see the conflict that comes with fighting the system and what it really means to be an activist. We get to see a lot of different characters throughout this piece, and we get to see these very strong, emotional, provoking endings. A lot of these people that we see, we see the point of view of their story only to find out that a majority of them are actually imprisoned. And that's a really strong statement to end on, to the point that they ended up shutting down their movement. It's kind of interesting to see how the fight doesn't stop and the frustrations don't quit, yet these people keep pushing and going because that's the purpose of fighting for what you believe in, finding those hills that you're willing to die on. And this community knows that, if we continue living like this, we are going to be having a type of damage on humanity that we can't come back from. And so, this is human versus human. This is human versus nature. And I think they did a really good job at breaking down the rights that people do have and the challenges they do face. The scene that I feel like sticks out to me the most is when we're following an activist, and she talks about how she is a victim of sexual assault and all the hoops and hurdles that she's had to go through in order to get justice for this heinous act that has, happened to her and obviously had an imprint and altered her life, right? And how interesting the system is, because here she'll be arrested and go through the process of being served in a small amount of time frame for fighting for something that she believes in. And so it's a very strong piece. It's a very relevant piece, and more eyes need to be viewing documentaries like this one.